In Texas, charter schools are considered public schools according to the Texas Administrative Code, the Texas Education Code, and the Texas Supreme Court has also ruled that charter schools in Texas are public schools. Case closed. But they're a very unique type of public school, and they do have some organizational, legal, and corporate differences from your neighborhood traditional public school that are often misunderstood, not fully appreciated. So in this short video, I'm going to explain what those are. First, let's be clear that I'm talking about what are called open enrollment charter schools. In Texas, there are basically three types of charter school owners allowed to operate charter schools. A Texas public university can operate a charter school, a traditional school district can also operate a charter school, and even a Texas municipality can operate a charter school. I'm really not talking about those charter schools. Only a very small percentage of charter schools in Texas have been started and operated by universities, traditional school districts, or municipalities. Most charter schools in Texas are owned and operated by a not-for-profit organization incorporated in Texas after being authorized by the Texas Secretary of State. These are referred to as open enrollment charter schools. If you're a private individual, group, or association and you want to open a charter school, the first thing you must do is form a legal entity, become incorporated, and then seek a not-for-profit status or designation from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. This is what I did when I formed Orenda Education, the legal entity and holding company for our Orenda Charter School District and its individual campuses. The 501c3 designation we receive from the IRS means the legal entity is tax exempt because no one individual or group benefits financially from the legal structure that was created. The new entity does not seek to return a profit for shareholders, but rather the new 501c3 not-for-profit entity has a charitable mission. In the case of a charter school entity, a mission to educate the youth of Texas. Once you've had your legal not-for-profit entity created, you must get approval from the Texas State Board of Education to operate a charter school. Once a year, they accept applications and the state has a cap on how many charter operators they allow. Most applications are in fact rejected. Now, the differences between open enrollment charter schools and traditional public schools can be seen in the following areas that I want to talk about: ownership differences, governance, legal, funding, tuition and fees, enrollment, curriculum instruction, teacher qualifications, and finally, accountability differences. Nothing is more important to the success or failure of a charter school than its ownership structure. Traditional public schools are basically owned by our state government, with some additional local government control. If the school system were to fail, become financially insolvent, the state of Texas would step in and take over the assets of the traditional school district. The school staff salaries, other operating costs, buildings, debt, etc. are paid for with state and local taxes. If the school goes belly up and can't meet its legal obligations, whether they be financial or other, the government looks at the situation and says, hey, that's ours. What you have, you got from state and local taxes. We own it. Let's get it back. For charter schools, the ownership structure is a bit different. While the charter school is a public school, the legal entity that was granted a charter to operate the charter school by the State Board of Education, that's a private corporation. That not-for-profit corporation may in fact have some assets that were not accumulated with state or local tax revenues, and therefore the state has no claim of ownership to those. For example, the Orenda Education entity I incorporated that operates the Orenda Charter School District brought almost $2 million of private assets that we had accumulated from our prior activities in a healthcare management business that we operated. These private accumulated assets were and are totally separate and unrelated to our public charter school activities, funded by the state of Texas. Now, from a public accounting standpoint, these private assets are listed separately on our audited financial statements. Should we go belly up, and we won't, but if we did, the state can only claim ownership of the assets that are public, that is, accumulated from state and local government revenue sources. Let's look at the difference in governance. Traditional public schools are governed by publicly elected officials, school board members who represent a district, a geographic area or boundary within the school district's boundary. Charter schools, in contrast, are governed by members appointed to the board in accordance with the corporate bylaws of the legal entity. Now, there are pros and cons to each of these governance structures. Traditional schools with elected board members and charter schools with appointed board members. Some like to say that our public schools are more accountable to the taxpayers because they get to elect the school governing board members. While this may give you a sense of ownership of your local public school, your school board representative may or may not agree with your wishes for what the school should or shouldn't do. And they are only one vote on the school board. How much change can you, a tax-paying, voting resident, really force upon your local public school? Another problem with this structure is the constant turnover of school board members, each coming on the school with different agendas sometimes. Often, one school board hires a district superintendent, and 4 years later, or sooner, the school board that hired the superintendent has changed members dramatically. Suddenly, the superintendent has a different group of people to please. Oftentimes, the local school board becomes dysfunctional. We read of publicly elected school board members getting into verbal fights or worse and suing each other. The advantages of the charter school appointed board members is that the nominating committee of the charter can appoint members they know are perfectly aligned with the school mission, vision, values, academic and financial targets set by the board. In the charter school governance model, there can be more stability, consistency, and less turmoil at the top of the organization. New charter school board members can be screened and long-term relationships can be established and maintained. This gives charter school superintendents more confidence that the board that hired them will remain predictable and their goal for the school will remain consistent. Now, this works great when the charter school is a high-achieving, well-functioning school entity. The downside to this governance model comes when the charter school is performing poorly. This insulary governance structure can be hard to change when things go badly, and that's a negative. Poor performing schools, and any business for that matter, must change at the top of the organization for impactful improvements to occur at the service delivery level. Legal. So traditional public schools must be in compliance with all public school related federal, state, and local laws governing public education. Charter schools must also be in compliance with these very same laws, like non-discrimination, Title IX, etc. But charter schools are exempt from just a few state laws required of traditional school districts. For example, charter schools do not have to accept some students with severe criminal records. However, most education consumers will not notice any difference in the legal requirements between the two. Well, what about funding differences? Well, traditional public schools have 4 main sources of revenue streams, while charter schools only have 2. Of the 4, the 2 largest revenue streams for traditional public schools are state revenues based on a per-pupil funding formula, plus local tax revenues that schools use to cover the costs of school staff salaries and benefits, other operating costs, and facility costs such as school buildings, football stadiums, performing arts centers, you know. Charter schools have absolutely no taxing authority, so they do not have as many revenue streams as traditional public schools. Now, the state recognized that charter schools also had similar costs to operate like traditional schools do, but because they cannot tax the families who enroll their students in a charter school, the state funding formula was adjusted for charter schools to help bridge some of this funding gap. However, depending on what independent funding study one looks at and where a charter school is located, most charter schools receive anywhere from $600 to $2,000 less per student per year than traditional public schools. Some charter schools, like ours, actively employ charitable fundraising strategies to help bridge this funding gap. Tuition and fees. Actually, here, there are no differences. Both traditional and public charter schools are prohibited from charging tuition. Both types of public schools are free to attend. However, some fees are allowed by both traditional and public charter schools, such as, fees for meals, extracurricular activities. All of these are voluntary. What about enrollment? For traditional public schools, they must accept all students in their school district geographic boundary. Unless the school district is severely overcrowded, most districts have open transfer policies, allowing students from other neighboring communities to enroll if they have a seat available as well. Charter schools also have a geographic boundary as determined in their charter. Generally, a charter school will share a boundary with one or more local public schools. But charter schools can be a little more restrictive in who they enroll. While by law they cannot discriminate in who they accept, they only have to accept as many students as they have seats available. If the charter school has more applications for enrollment than seats available, they must hold an independent and transparent lottery to determine who gets enrolled and in what order. What about curriculum and instruction? Both traditional and charter schools must provide the state-mandated curriculum and meet the same state graduation requirements. But charter schools are granted some freedoms to provide new and innovative instruction based on their charter application that was accepted and rewarded. In fact, one of the main objectives of the charter school legislation adopted in Texas in 1995 was to encourage innovation and creativity in our public school classrooms. Charter schools do that, and many traditional schools also are making positive changes as a result of this new competition. Teachers. Traditional public school teachers must be certified and highly qualified in accordance with the federal No Child Left Behind Act. For example, in Texas, that means certified to teach in their subject area with a bachelor's degree and proven competency based on an exam you take. For charter schools, the teacher qualifications are determined in the school charter. However, to access federal funds, teachers must also be highly qualified in accordance with NCLB. While some charter schools have lower standards for their teachers, our Orenda Charter School has the same certification and highly qualified standards for our teachers as traditional public schools have. But one big difference is that teachers are typically under one-year contracts with traditional public schools, while most charter schools do not have contracts with teachers. Charter schools follow an at-will employment labor law. This gives charter schools more flexibility to not tolerate and to remove poor-performing teachers. On the downside, charter schools may see more teacher turnover, as it's just easier for teachers to leave a charter school because they're not under contract. Some teachers, however, prefer working for a charter school because of the freedoms they enjoy, the smaller school setting, and less bureaucracy to deal with. And finally, accountability. Traditional and charter schools receive A to F accountability ratings for academic and financial standards compliance. For traditional public schools, they must meet state academic and financial standards, or they're assigned a state monitor who will come in to help fix the situation. Consistently poor performing and failing traditional public schools are rarely ever closed down. Charter schools are held to a higher standard and are more accountable. If they fail to meet state academic and financial standards 3 years in a row, they're automatically closed down. Numerous charter school innovations have not worked, and those charter schools have been closed over the years. Fortunately, many charter school innovations have and are working tremendously. In summary, charter schools are public schools, but they are different and unique from traditional public schools. They serve an important niche. The Texas public school system and many thousands of Texas children have benefited from this charter school reform movement.